chief chaplain of the Illinois Department of Correction, who's worked with my father for how many years? A bunch of years. But he emailed me right before some family emergency came up. He can't make it. So instead, you'll hear from me. So there was once a rabbi who used to give his Shabbos speech exactly 5 minutes every week. And 1 week, he went longer. He went for 12 minutes. So the people asked him afterwards. We don't understand. Every single week, it's exactly 5 minutes. Why this week is it 12 minutes? So he said, I prepare my speech on my way walking to the synagogue. So I'm 5-minute walk, so that takes 5 minutes. Today, there was construction. I had to go a detour around the block. It took 12 minutes, and now the speech is 12 minutes. So my father just drove down from Chicago, 6-hour drive. So you can imagine how long his speech is going to be. Mm-hmm. Anyways, without any further ado, Rabbi Scheinman.
About a month, maybe more, Mendel called me and he said he wanted to ask me a question. So he asked me what my thoughts were on free speech. If he thought that, so I said, I think I'm in favor of free speech. He says, good, you're coming down tonight to give a free speech. So I'd like to start with a story that took place around this time of the year in 1992. And it sort of has to do with prison, but as you'll see, there's a lot more when a person goes to prison. It says that there's 8 to 10 people that are affected by the incarceration. So this is one of those stories. We got a call in our offices in Chicago. A man called from Israel that he has a sister living in a community called Spring Valley, Illinois. It's about 100 miles from Chicago. And he said she needs help. What happened? The police showed up at their house one morning. She called 911. And when the police came, they saw the mother was holding her 9-month-old child full of blood. And they tried to revive the child, but they weren't successful. And behind one of the cars, the father of the child was crouched down. Apparently, he had gone out of his mind. He became deranged. He thought the child was possessed by some force that he had to get rid of, and he stabbed the child to death. So the history of this family, it's the mother was 30 years old, an Israeli woman. She was from Morocco, moved to Israel. In Israel, she met her husband, who is a Romanian Jew. They got married, and they moved to America. He's 8 years older than her. They initially moved to California, to Thousand Oaks, and he worked in computers. But after they were married a few years, they had 4 children, all under the age of 6, and they decided that they could find a better job and better accommodations in Chicago, so they packed up into their mobile home and they drove toward Chicago. And the mobile home, though, broke down. It broke down in this town, and that's where they stayed. They never went further. And this was their 5th child. So the man from Israel was calling us, what can we do? This child now was buried in a non-Jewish cemetery in that town. And his sister and the 4 children, they don't have a husband now at home because he was apprehended by the police. And they don't want to stay in the house. They're too scared. So what did we do? I found a volunteer to come with me. We found a big enough vehicle, and we drove out to where the woman was, and we brought them to Chicago. I think my son may have been just a little boy then. And we brought this mother and their 4 children. They never had seen a synagogue in their life. They'd never seen a kosher store in their life. We brought them on Friday to eat and to have a meal at the kosher pizza store. They came to our home for Shabbat, and this is the first time they saw the inside of a synagogue, a Torah. They started learning the Aleph Beis. And in the meantime, I also had contacted the Chicago Rabbinical Council. What can we do about the burial? and they said I should contact a funeral home in Chicago called Pizer Weinstein. And they said that with the proper arrangements and paper signed, the mother will come in. They'll be able to take possession of the body and have the body reburied in a Jewish cemetery. So that's one of the things the mother needed to do. I went to visit the father in the meantime at the Bureau County Jail. I spoke to him for an hour because he was always a good husband. He was always a good man. So the mother was asking, "Can you find out why my husband did this?" And when I spoke to him, he was, like I told you, he was totally, he just said that he got messages from God, that in order to save the world, he needs to do this. He just was not with it. I needed to stay in contact with him, and I did until the last day of his life. He died in prison eventually. But here's a Jewish woman, only 30, and she's not going to see her husband again. She needs to get a Jewish divorce from him. So I needed to stay in contact because in Jewish law, the husband has to give consent for that. So it was a good idea that I made a contact with him, and I stayed in contact with him over the years. In the meantime, this lady also had family in France. So the chief rabbi of France called a friend of his in Chicago that he should intercede. This man, his name is Dr. Pohl. He got in touch. He found out he was glad that we were doing things. And the brother from France flew to America, and we had a meeting together. They decided the best thing is that his sister and the 4 children should return to Israel. There's nothing left for them in America. And this Dr. Pohl, he went to their little town. He sold off meager properties they had. We called El Al. El Al said, since they're returning home, they'll give a discounted price. We helped pay for their tickets. We got them passports. It was before 9/11. You were able to get passports in one day. Nowadays, that wouldn't happen. But they were able to go in. The papers got signed to have the baby transferred to the Jewish cemetery. And then the lady went back to gather her things. And for the last few days, they were going to be in America. It was decided that she'll stay with her 4 kids, bring all the rest of their property, and stay in our home for a few days. But then it got complicated. Number one, we got back to that town there, the cemetery there. They agreed, but they charged extra price. Eventually, we got the baby out, though. Then this woman's youngest child got the chicken pox. And it could be like my son Mendel was still home. Maybe he never had the chicken pox. So my wife said, no, we can't have that child with the chicken pox here. So we had the 2 older children, and then there was a family in Skokie who had no younger children. So it worked out fine because the mother and the 2 children stayed there. These 2 children, all of them needed a lot of attention. This way, it was spread around. They got a lot of attention. On Purim of that year, 1992, the baby was named Abraham, had a traditional to be circumcised and named, and finally was buried to a Jewish burial on Purim, 1992. And then a few days later, the mother and the 4 children, they flew off to Israel, and they went to a town where there's a Chabad rabbi who speaks English. Because this lady, even though she was from Morocco and was in Israel for a while, none of our children they didn't know a word of Hebrew. So this rabbi spoke English. He got them set up. I called them a month later. They were welcomed warmly into the community, and they stayed in touch because they kept wanting to know, can you get my husband to give a divorce? She wanted to get remarried. Finally, after many years, he was housed at the Menard Correctional Center, and a rabbi from Memphis came up. He agreed. One time the rabbi came, he didn't want to see him. The rabbi had to come back a second time. Finally, he gave the divorce, and I think it was in less than a year later he passed away in prison. So that's a story of one man was serving time in prison, but his wife, his 4 children, all the extended relatives, everybody was affected by it, and they needed that help too. The second story I wanted to say before I start talking about what happens inside the prisons is a story from my personal teacher and mentor, the Holy Lubavitcher Rebbe. What happened is in the federal prison system, they do not have it today, but there was a time when they were progressive enough to feel that they wanted to have a furlough program. What's the furlough program? Furlough program is since there's any ministers, I think it wasn't just for Jewish groups, it was for all religions. The religious people that come in, they're not there all the time. So they decided to take a group of low security people, very, very low security, no risk, take them out for 2 weeks, give them a seminar in their religious beliefs, and those people will be the lay leaders within the prison walls in the federal prison system. So this is a group of Jewish men that they came out, they went to the East Coast, they studied in a school called, in Morristown, New Jersey, a rabbinic college. They joined the students there, and on Shabbos, the program was taking place in Brooklyn, in the Crown Heights neighborhood, and the main highlight is they would go on Shabbat to 770 Eastern Parkway, and they would be addressed by the great Lubavitcher Rebbe, and then on Sunday, he would personally bless each one of them. So before one of these big gatherings, let's say a lot of times college groups go to New York, or senior citizens, or soldiers. So there's people that arrange seating because it's very crowded. A lot of people want to hear. There's thousands of people. So somebody goes in before and arranges seating for the groups. So the rabbi in charge of this group, he got called by the secretary of the Rebbe, and the secretary told him, the Rebbe has special instructions for your group. You should not find seating for them. You should scatter them throughout the crowd. A few here, a few there, a few there. And the reason was because whenever there's a group, people, obviously, they start pointing and say, oh, who's that? Who are those people over there? So he said, I do not want people to start pointing at a group of men and say, oh, those are the prisoners. Those are the criminals. He didn't want that to happen. If they're all scattered among the crowd, nobody will, a man here, a man there, nobody knows who they are. It was like they were camouflaged within the audience. Then, when the talk started, the Rebbe took time to give a special message just for these men. And he explained that the purpose of our souls coming down from the heavens, after all, why does the soul need to leave heaven and come down to this earth? If you read the headlines lately, it's a very, very interesting place, this earth. And why does the soul have to come here? And the reason is because our job is to transform the darkness in the world into light. Our job is to transform evil into good, to brighten up the world, have enough light to eliminate the darkness. And over the course of Jewish history, he said, most of the darkness of the world has been removed, most of the apparent darkness, but there's still pockets of evil and darkness that are left. Now, not everybody is equipped to deal with all that darkness. Not everybody has a soul powerful enough to reach that darkness and transform it. It's only very special souls, very special people that have the ability to go into the darkest places and those hardest places, and they're the souls that could transform that darkness. And basically what he was saying is that just because someone finds themselves in a prison, that doesn't mean that they're there because of the crime or the other way around. I'm not going to say for sure, but I would venture to say that each one of you might know at least one person who you're scratching your head, how come they're not in prison? How are they still on the street? How come they're still around? So that's because their souls aren't strong enough to handle it. It's only those people that are strong enough to handle that environment. But ultimately, why are they there? Obviously, if they did something wrong, that's one reason they're there. But there's a deeper reason. It's they have the souls to reach that darkness. So not only did he make sure they didn't get embarrassed, look at those people. He turned it all around and saying, these are actually very special people. These are very special souls. So with that story in mind, that I want to frame the whole conversation that the people my son and myself visit are very special souls. And when we go in to see an individual, a man, a woman, or even children, juveniles, we are not looking at a society tends to put labels on people. This one has to register as this one has to register as that. Instead of having a name and being called a human and a person, they're called, they now have got a label placed on them because of the crime they did. We need to separate what a person did from who they are. So we are going in, and each person we see, we are looking to the deeper level. We are dealing with a soul behind bars. We are dealing with and we are there to bring humanity, because I don't have to tell you that the staff and the other people that are housed with our clients are not exactly warm and fuzzy and touchy and feely. They might do a lot of touching, but it might be a hard touch with an iron fist. And they may have abusive language thrown at them. And it's a very, very tough environment. So could you imagine having someone come in once a month who smiles, who treats them like a human, treats them like a person? And I probably could speak for my son, include him, but I know myself, when I go to visit, the men or the women I see, I do not go there peddling religion. The first thing is I peddle my smile, and I always have a joke. And, there's the old bad joke, why are there so few Jews in jail? Because they eat all the lox. Okay, I won't tell that again. It's not a good one. But we always have a small joke to get somebody to laugh, to get somebody to smile. Then we say, what's going on? How can we help? And sometimes we just sit for an hour, and we sit for a half hour or 45 minutes discussing problems of life, discussing what do they do. Their wives are not talking to them. Their children don't want to talk to them. How do they readjust? How do they come out? Can I be forgiven? Rabbi, can I be forgiven? I did X, Y, and Z. You all know the 10 Commandments, right? You've heard of them at least. Does anybody know the 11th commandment? It's the most famous commandment of all. Thou shalt not get caught. And that is the main commandment that's broken by a lot of the people. They were caught. Once you're caught, you're embarrassed. If you're caught in a lie, in other words, that means the truth has been revealed. And the truth does set you free. So once a man is caught in his lies and his games and I do see innocent people, but most of the people have done something wrong, but now they're faced with the truth. And now they want to know what the truth is. Okay, we want to get straightened out. So those are the main topics that we discuss. Of course, we pray with them if they want. Of course, we bring them a Torah and we bring them a prayer book. Of course, if they need things for Passover and the holidays, we bring that. That's not the primary reason. That's not the real reason why we're there. And I wanted to share a story, because I know this question may come up. A lot of people want to know about anti-Semitism in prison. I can tell you there's less anti-Semitism in prison than France on the street these days. Unfortunately, in the world, there's a lot of acts of anti-Semitism. There are acts of anti-Semitism in prison, but probably less than you have going on in some places in Europe right now. I have a story, though, about a man, one of my innocent clients. He served a 35-year sentence. He was sentenced at 50%, so he spent over 17 years in prison. And this man was the kindest, he still is. But while he was there, he was not a criminal. He didn't act like a criminal. He was an upright, straight, honest person. He treated every man he saw with respect. He walked with respect himself. He was humble. He didn't go with his neck stretched out. He just walked around as an honest, true person. And he was respected by every officer, by every administrator, by every other inmate that was in the prison. He was respected by all. He experienced no anti-Semitism. He was respected by everybody. He was being a light unto the nations. He was a representative. Everybody knew he was Jewish. He went to pray every day, but he did it with such dignity, and he did it with such humility, and so truthfully that everybody saw it. Don't mess with him. You know, there's a saying, you can't con a con man. Well, you can't fool a con man. They know when they see truth too. And this man stood out like a bright light. This man, everybody saw was true, and there was an aura around him that nobody bothered him. Whereas I see other men and other women who come in, and I find it ironic that here are some people that they took liberties with the law when they were on the street. But once they get locked up, they take no liberty with the law. They say, I have my rights, and I know what the law is. And how come you guys aren't keeping the law now? I have this right, and I have that right, and I have that right. And they go very, 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 with a strong attitude. They go in like big shots, like I'm going to show them, like they want to get back almost at at society and the administration. And those guys don't fare so well. Those guys do experience anti-Semitism because if you're going to bump heads with everybody over there, they'll bump heads right back with you. That's their specialty. So if you go in just to be a Jew with humility, and you do it respectfully, that innocent man got everything he wanted. He was not denied anything. And some guys who go in with their hard heads, they're not so hard when they get finished with. They're a little softer. They get banged around a little, unfortunately. Not that that's right. But anti-Semitism, I think, sometimes has to do with the energy that surrounds the person. Some people draw it upon themselves, and other people walk around and they can do everything in a very, very respectful way. I know, again, myself, and when my son goes into prison, we smile to every person we see. Officer, male, female, Jewish, not Jewish, all inmates. We smile and we say hello to everybody. Because when we go in there, we are representing the nation of Israel. We are representing every single Jew in the world. We are representing them. And it's important that people should see how a person walks in. If we are polite, if we open the door, if we are going through a door and we hold it for the next person, or if we say, excuse me, or we're sorry, we smile, we tell a joke, we're polite. If we don't get upset, if we just, sometimes in prisons, things happen. So some people that are volunteers or contractors go in and stamp their feet and scream and yell, and nobody wants to speak to them. We are always nice to the people at the front desk. It's not their fault. We smile with them, we talk with them. So, and this leaves a good impression. I've seen people years later, other prisons, oh yes, that I know the rabbi, it leaves a very good impression. So not only are the trips into prison to visit somebody and bring humanity, but it's also to show people that, you know, it's the stereotype sometimes. And I don't want to say Northern Illinois is better than Southern Illinois, but Southern Illinois, the stereotypes of Jewish people might be a little different than up north where Chicago is. And it's good for people to see, oh, the rabbi, he's okay. If that's what Jewish is, that's not so bad. Okay, I can handle that. So that's also part of our mission, is to leave a good impression wherever we go. And God forbid, not the opposite. We know there's too many rabbis with their names in the news sometimes, not for good reason, so we need a balance for that. At this point, I just would, with that introduction, maybe some of you have some questions, and we can take some questions, and that will probably lead into some further, then I have some more stories to tell afterwards. In the meantime, are there any questions?
How did the Romanian Jew die?
The Romanian Jew died in prison of natural causes.
Really? Just stress, probably.
Age.
Oh, okay.
and not lack of good health care.
Yeah, at Menard?
The healthcare system's not the best.
Who would have thought?
Any other questions?
I was wondering if were there any understanding that you're not there to sell religion, but to the extent that you get into it, is there any particular stories, motifs, messages from Scripture that resonated particularly with people on the inside?
There is one story from the Scriptures which I always share with the men. Who was the first Jew ever in prison that we hear about, written about in the Torah? Does anybody know?
Oh, Yaakov
Joseph.
or Yosef?
Joseph. He was sold down to Egypt by his brothers. He was, now it's very interesting to note, he was the first Jew in prison, and he was framed. He actually was innocent. He was thrown in jail for a crime he didn't do. His master's wife tried to approach him, and he rebuffed her, and she turned on him and testified that he was inappropriate with her, and he sat in jail for 12 years. While he was in jail, he was happy, he was jolly, he had his trust in God, he wasn't depressed. And again, this is the type, he was sort of like that man I said who sat there for 17 years. He was that type. He helped everybody, he was helped for everybody. If he saw somebody else that was depressed,